You know what really grinds my gears?
I have a feeling you're about to tell me.
I am. White evangelical Christians have been a driving force in creating the politics of retribution and revenge. Maybe the driving force. That particular quote, when I came across it in an article that will obviously be linked, that particular quote summarized my number one complaint about a lot of things that we have alluded to or discussed in not quite direct fashion over, we'll just call it 2 years. And it's not the only one. There are other quotes out of this article that caught my attention like that too. And it just so succinctly puts into words the things that I have thought and wanted to say, but didn't have data to back it up. And now, there's data. It's not surprising. Like, this is very much I see it around me, and kind of wet finger in the air would have said, yeah, this is probably accurate. But to know that it is factually true just kind of feels like a vindication of my thought processes in general. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
So the full quote, I want to go down, I'm going to reread the first part of it too, but I want to also give the attribution as far as where it comes from. The full quote is as follows. White evangelical Christians have been a driving force in creating the politics of retribution and revenge, maybe the driving force. White evangelicals are among the GOP's most loyal constituencies, and if they declared certain conduct off limits, candidates and elected officials would comply, but no such signals were ever sent. According to the Pew Research Center, in 2020, after all the lies, misconduct, and deranged conspiracy theories we saw unfold during the Trump presidency, 85% of white evangelical Protestant voters who frequently attended religious services voted for Trump. Most of them became more, not less, tolerant of Trump's misconduct over the course of his tenure. How fucking hypocritical do you have to be? You know? I mean, like, how... This is the part that is so difficult to wrap my head around. If you profess to be let's even leave Christian out of it. You just profess to be a good human being. How the fuck do you get to the point that you back Trump in the first place? Much less add in this supposed doctrine and ideology of treating your neighbors with love and respect and empathy and care and compassion, and backing someone who very clearly embodies the exact opposites of those things.
The term colonizer Christianity was used in front of me not too long ago for the first time, and it was a comparison of the white church with the black church, and how in the white church Jesus was a colonizer, or is given colonizer sort of traits, and in the black church that he is not that way at all. I wish I could expound more on that, but hopefully your personal and anecdotal experiences may lead you to accept that as a true statement.
I track with where it's going, for sure.
Yeah.
The traditional Southern Baptist Church is absolutely very indicative or very representative of that statement.
And they're aggressive with their evangelism.
And in my experience personally, much less anecdotally, extremely outnumber by orders of magnitude environments or churches that are not that way. I could probably count them up and figure it out, but let's just put it in general terms. 98+% of religious institutions that I have visited, so we're not even limiting it to just Protestant churches, have been very reminiscent of that particular mindset. It doesn't take much to realize there's a problem at the church level if you're someone searching for that particular path and ideology.
Yeah, there's step one of white Protestant Christianity in the United States is to not read your Bible. That's step one. Step two is to put the hook, line, and sinker of what they want you to believe, what their talking points are, what moves their agenda forward, down your throat.
I mean, yes.
Was that too simple?
Well, there are two things that keep coming to mind that I kind of want to distinguish between that I don't necessarily think are not that simple, but there are two different things that are both equally problematic and are approaching it in different ways. And I think as I describe where I'm having trouble with just it being that simple, it kind of makes sense. There's one school of thought that is very fire and brimstone is how it's described, very much wrath-focused, God will smite you if you don't do as he says, kind of teachings and understandings. And then
that's relatively old school.
Right. And there's the other one about you have to be repentant and you have to only do good and seek forgiveness for those things that you do that are bad, and it's a constant cycle of that, and you're demoralized and downtrodden and outcast, and all in the views of this deity that you should worship, right? There's that set of views that is kind of the transition from fire and brimstone to no, you're forgiven, but you're not really worthy of being forgiven, and we're going to remind you of it. Those teachings. And that tends to be how most of modern Southern churches approach things. The correct path is very infrequent finding in the wild, but it is a different mindset. We'll put it that way. I will summarize it just for the sake of the contrasting between the different ones. But the other one is none of us are perfect. None of us are worthy of redemption, and yet we're saved by our beliefs because of the sacrifice that Jesus made, and his teachings and his compassion for others are what we should embody and embrace and attempt to sow into the world. That is how we show people that we follow this loving deity.
Yeah, I can't remember if we talked about this on the show or if just you and I had talked about this, but the difference between, I feel like what you've just described is the difference between top-down and bottom-up religion.
Yeah, I know we've mentioned it at least on the show. I don't know if we talked about it in a lot of detail, but we have referenced it in the context of a show.
Yeah, both the fire and brimstone and the loving God wanting to redeem you versions of Protestant Christianity, they're both top down. There's something about you inherently bad about you that needs to be repaired by God. Whereas I think what you're describing is I want to be closer to my creator, this deity, my creator, and I would like to continue to grow and become a better version of myself, and that will get me closer to them, and it will allow me to honor my deity, being the bottom up version.
And I kept struggling with what word to use there, because I know we've talked about it in the past in general. For Christianity, it would be Jesus/God. For Islam, it would be Allah. The label and name that you attach can change with the underlying premise being the same.
Yes.
And that is a distinction that you cannot make with the other styles of teaching.
Yes. So I think the top-down, just to be consistent with our terms, and the top-down version of Christianity is what I think is highly problematic and what leads us to this dynamic that we have. Because with this top-down Christianity, where you are inherently evil, or there's something inherently wrong with you that has to be fixed, you sort of give up a certain responsibility. You don't fix yourself. You are not responsible for your betterment. It is your deity who is responsible for that. And I think that creates a faux humility, where it's like, I didn't do anything. It wasn't me who made myself. It wasn't me who saved me. It was my God who saved me, and I do these things in the name of my God, and He has directed me to do these things, and you can sort of separate that responsibility in your mind, and that frees you up to begin to do a lot of things that you might not otherwise do.
I agree. It's the reason I'm pausing is I'm trying to kind of wrap my head around my thoughts on correlating that with this article, because everything that you described is exactly how I would translate what breeds the forgiveness of behaviors in search of what that person could achieve for a cause kind of thing that this article talks about. And I don't know of a good way to really put it into words necessarily, so this is going to sound somewhat rambling, but I'm hoping it makes sense. So with what you're describing, if you were to take the mindset of a traditional, fairly regularly attending services Christian, we'll just put it that way. Someone who maybe
somebody more than just Christmas and Easter.
Yes, yeah. Someone who is at least regularly attending religious services. Well, that's a good way to summarize it. And you were to present them with two people, no names, just two people, one person who actually represented their values and one person who represented the opposites of those values. That's really what we're talking about in the scope of this argument, or the scope of this article, is that latter person, the one who does not represent their values, is looked at as a necessary means to achieve a result because of this lack of accountability for the self. And that phrasing is what I have problems with, because I feel like it's so difficult to grasp if you don't read the article and kind of follow that train of thought all the way through, but I'm not sure how else to describe it. There was one particular quote that kind of illustrates it. I'm going to read that and see if maybe that makes a difference as well. But the problem with it is we're talking about an emotional response to feeling like, one, I'm not accountable for the betterment of self. I put that in somebody else's hands, right? And then two, in conjunction with that, I feel constantly attacked or belittled or disrespected and need someone to physically stand up for me. And you have this dichotomy of a spiritual accountability in some other entity and a physical accountability in some other entity, attempting to reconcile all that internally. Does any of that really make sense? Do you kind of follow?
I do.
Okay. So what prompted that was this particular passage out of the article. Human emotions can be dominant and even determinative in distorting and deforming judgments. Individuals who honestly believe that the Bible is authoritative in their lives who insist that they cherish Jesus' teachings from the Sermon on the Mount, in parentheses, blessed are the meek, the merciful, the peacemakers, and the pure in heart. Turn the other cheek, love your enemies. Close parentheses. And Paul's admonition to put away anger, wrath, slander, and malice, and replace them with compassionate hearts, kindness, humility, meekness, patience, spirit of forgiveness, and above all, love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony, find themselves embracing political figures and a political ethic that are antithetical to these precepts. Many of those who claim in good faith that their Christian conscience required them to get passionately involved in politics have, upon doing so, discredited their Christian witness. Jesus has become a hood ornament, in the words of the theologian Russell Moore, in this case placed atop tribal and cultural war politics. That quote is difficult to follow with me reading it. I promise you it makes a lot more sense if you just read the article linked. But recognizing that dissonance between adhering to a set of beliefs, whether sincerely or insincerely, just is irrelevant for this particular scope of discussion. But claiming to adhere to this set of beliefs and backing someone who is antithetical to those beliefs is the pure, unadulterated definition of hypocrisy.
I agree. I mean, I remember going to church as a young man and hearing a sermon about the Sermon on the Mount and discussing meekness. And meekness is not weakness. It's the ability to humble yourself in the face of, various different scenarios, but knowing when to withhold your power during certain situations. And I think it's all but lost in modern Christianity, because there is a need to win and to be dominant and to, I feel like it might be taking an overzealous approach to the evangelism of the, or the Great Commission, and going out and being a witness of your religion.
It's difficult to find the words. I so feel that.
There's a sort of cultural, like Christianity has wrapped themselves into the or they've wrapped the culture into themselves and created this sort of manifest destiny for the religion instead of the West. Like if you go out and you evangelize, you're going to be successful, and it is your it's your destiny, and it is something that in some cases has become somewhat aggressive.
So this is what I see as the fundamental flaw, and this may be easier to kind of frame the discussion around. We use the term to witness or to evangelize or spread the word or missionary or mission trips, those kinds of things. Those terms have been bastardized into, hey, let me tell you about Jesus. And that's not what it is. But every church, or most every church that you go to, will have it phrased about, well, you should talk to everybody around you about God and Jesus and the Bible. The actual teachings are to live your life in a way that attracts people to you, to be a decent human being, and then have people inquire as to what brings you that peace and joy and happiness. To be an example, not to preach. That is the piece that most churches conveniently refuse to emphasize, because it's not a moneymaker, or maybe that's too pessimistic. It's not a attention getter and a driver of attendance or engagement or influence. Me living my life as an example to others, something I can do whether the church is involved or not. So why would they emphasize that that's technically the way to witness to others? Does that kind of go hand in hand with what you were trying to describe?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I think so.
Just making sure I didn't completely misunderstand the train of thought. Because that's an important distinction to me. And not only for my difference in viewing what it means to be following a particular deity or theologic philosophy or religion, like, take your pick. I know I've mentioned it before, I've long been a proponent of not ascribing labels to whatever that thing is that you feel compelled to be drawn toward, because labels are inherently problematic in many different ways. And in the course of our discussions, I've labeled it Taoist Christianity, and there are other labels that can be used as well that help convey this fluidity to, I don't have to define something to try to be a better person and exhibit that positivity as an example for others. I can believe in nothing and do that same thing. That's fine. The point is that behavior, that setting the example for others and drawing others to you because you are a positive influence on their lives, that's what all the religions actually teach. That's what all of the philosophies surrounding harmony and joy and peacefulness actually try to bring you to. And it's what being a decent fucking person is in the first place. If all of these things line up, you can't tell me there's not something to it. And the core fundamental piece, we like being around decent people. I've been saving that rant. That is such I can't stand how difficult people make understanding that concept kind of rant.
Well, I don't think they want to understand that.
They don't. Most people could care less. They want to show up and attend church services, give some money, and then do whatever they want to do the rest of the week.
And then go get forgiven again.
Yep.
If they need it.
And that particular cycle is complete and utter bullshit.
Top-down Christianity, my friend.
We haven't even gotten to half the other quotes that I saved out of this article either. Like, you can't finish there.
Well, I was just going to say, I was thinking about how, we're talking about how, Trump has said the things that he's said and done the things that he's done, and he still has all of this backing from the Christian community, and I think Ron DeSantis will probably have the same thing. Like, but it shouldn't be a surprise when the biblical heroes are people like Abraham and David, and because they were not exemplary people. Jesus is not really a hero in the Bible. People, he's the crux of Christianity, but he otherwise, goes unnoticed, other than he is the Jesus, he's the pill that you take to make yourself feel better, to forgive yourself of your sins. He's used as a crutch in that way, and he's not actually someone that modern Christian, or at least the Christianity that I'm familiar with, exemplifies and wants to emulate.
All right, I have to digest that a little bit. Hold on. So, I follow, I think, up to the last bit. What you're basically getting at is, we look to the stories of, say, David and Samson and the whole overcoming adversity as the heroes in general, but because Jesus advocated compassion and empathy and didn't promote any type of rebellion or violence, that it's while his behavior and teachings are the crux of what Christianity should be, it is not what we view as the hero of the story. Is that basically what you're saying?
I think so. Even though,
because I
guess,
do agree with that. I want to make sure that that's clear. It's just I want to make sure I translate it in a way that I completely get the same meaning behind how you're stating it.
Right. In Christianity, Jesus is the most important figure because he died for your sin, and he is who bridges the gap between your sin nature and coming closer to God. And the acceptance of that sort of sacrifice that he did is the crux of Christianity. But the person that Jesus was while living and the teachings he taught are not ones that are emulated in modern Christianity. I think there are people that do and try, but by far I don't think it is. I feel like somehow there's something missing between the teachings of Jesus and true humility and meekness that the modern church is, I think, avoiding. And
I agree. I do agree.
And they diminish Jesus into basically the thing that is going to save them. I remember hearing a pastor call him the Jesus pill. It's like, as soon as you do something bad, or you think something wrong, or fill in the blank where you feel like you need to do something to restore your good standing with God, you take your Jesus pill. He's the one who forgives you every time.
I agree. And so this is kind of fascinating because it actually ties into another quote that I wanted to get to, and I wasn't sure how I would pull it in.
Good.
Yeah. So let me have a moment to rephrase part of it slightly.
Yeah.
The thing that people are drawn to are the stand up for being trampled on, or there's some level of disrespect and someone stands up for them. And so the typical hero is the person who refutes something. It might be minimal, it might be fairly significant, it doesn't really matter. It's very much you're doing this thing and I am responding to that thing you are doing in a way that makes me feel good. Does that make enough sense there?
Yeah.
So the part that makes this fascinating is that the whole premise of this article is that the current Republican Party is a party of retribution and vengeance at this point. So the politics of retribution, the politics
Are you still
of
there?
vengeance. Yeah, can you hear me? I can hear you. Testing 1, 2.
I can hear you now.
Okay.
All I heard was you came in and like the politics of revolution.
Okay. I never lost hearing you, so
Okay.
I assumed it was just a brief blip.
Yeah.
God, I'm so looking forward to being able to have fiber to the premises in another house too.
Yeah.
So like the one of the big things out of this article is the emphasis on how the current Republican Party is the political party of vengeance and party of retribution. Everything has to be within the scope of some action against those who are adversaries to the party. And the opposite, or opposite may not be the right word, the way the article refers to it is the antidote to the politics of retribution is the politics of forbearance. And it's interesting because I had not thought of forbearance as the word I would use. And so I had to kind of think about that for a bit.
Yeah.
But forbearance is something of a neglected virtue, per the article. It is generally understood to mean patience and endurance, a willingness to show mercy and tolerance, making allowances for the faults of others, even forgiving those who offend you. Forbearance doesn't mean avoiding or artificially minimizing disagreements. It means dealing with them with integrity and a measure of grace. And it goes on to talk about the greatest embodiment of the politics of forbearance was Lincoln in facing the Civil War. And we can come back to that in a moment. I want to pause there because I want to correlate that to what we were saying about Jesus not being the hero of the story. Because what's fascinating to me is if you take these descriptors of the politics of forbearance, this willingness to look at the situation, to deal with the situation without emotional response to the individual that created the situation, you very much have the same embodiment of the teachings of Jesus during the course of his lifetime as trying to be a level of both objectivism and moving to a better place instead of reacting against a person. So as you were describing that particular thought about how his role or portrayal is even downplayed potentially, the same thing is evident in politics, but it's because the same thing is evident in our general behavior with each other. We are far more likely to decide to be petty and be passive-aggressive to that neighbor or coworker than we are to let it go or turn the other way or bring, let's say someone stole a lunch, bring an extra lunch. Or,
try to meet them where they are.
Exactly. And that level of pettiness pervades behavior from the minimal to the maximal. I know those words. They're not technically used appropriately there, but I liked it.
Yeah. Jesus is sort of an anti-hero in the sense that he lost in a way. I think that there are parts of
absolutely lost if you want to go through the story.
Yeah, and there's even parts of Christianity that will tell you that he lost because, and that's the reason why the Jews rejected him, is because they were expecting him to come and kick the Gentiles in the teeth and get them out of there and let them take over, have their promised land again, and that simply didn't happen. And while there's this kind of interesting dynamic of like, we'll be okay with Jesus being the loser. We're okay with Jesus is for losers when being a loser takes responsibility away from ourselves. But we also want to win because winning feels good, and we want to feel like we're not subjected to the world, and we're not subjected to what they might call certain abominations. And that's where I think they lose a lot of. I think that's where a certain type of aggression comes in.
So I think you're close. I agreed when you think about, from our perspective, Jesus lost, right? He died. The interesting thing is, if you really want to back up and think about the overall story, he died in the sense of, or he lost from a worldly perspective. He may or may not have lost from a spiritual or philosophical perspective, right? And I want to make the distinction only because this is the piece that most people don't focus on. And it's if you want to truly consider yourself a follower of any Protestant faith that believes in God and Jesus, you have to accept this particular distinction, which is we view the world through a material, worldly lens. And death is the indisputable end of that realm. You die, you lose. That's it. There is
Yeah.
no second place. Within the realm of following Christianity, the belief is that although death occurred, resurrection also occurred, and therefore vanquished death as a result. So it's not completely just he lost. He lost within this viewpoint, and then what you're willing to accept beyond that influences how you view whether it's lose or not. But most people can't take any type of thought exercise beyond that point, because none of us really, in our hearts, believe there's anything beyond death. How can you? I mean, what we know is the physical material world. We know that world ends when we die. It's either we hope for something beyond that, or we accept that that's the end of everything. Those are your two options.
Yeah.
If you hope for something beyond that, then you have to accept that there is something you cannot know until you experience it. There is an amount of faith in something beyond that end point. And that's, at the end of the day, that's all it means.
Yeah, I'm glad you made that distinction, because I definitely agree with that. From the worldly perspective, he lost, but if you read the Bible, he came and did exactly what he intended to do. So, in that sense, it's not a loss. And
it's funny. I argue that it's not necessarily a loss, but you could also argue that it's a loss. This is where it's so much fun. To play a devil's advocate. Because either way, if you don't, from our viewpoints as humans, if you don't stand up to something, or if you don't vanquish a foe, unless you count the abstract foe of death from the standpoint of resurrection as being something to be vanquished, then he did lose, unequivocally across the board. But at the same time, what's it mean to be a decent human? Is being a decent human vanquishing other people? Or is being a decent human having compassion and loving other people? And so once you start to kind of look at those nuances, what does it mean to win? Does it mean to win to show compassion and to elicit that type of response and building up of others? Or is that losing because you didn't vanquish someone?
That's where it becomes tricky, I think, for fighting what your human emotions are and what you should be, and the teachings that you should be following.
I'm going to go a step further, and I'm going to say that this is where evangelical Christians have a problem, because they want to vanquish something. Everything in the teachings they profess to follow are opposite that.
Yes. But if you create a narrative where you're vilifying wokeness and anything outside of what you believe to be traditional, natural state of things, without actually understanding the natural state of things, then you are justifying you're justifying your crusade.
I love the fact that you used crusade there.
Yeah.
So we've
highly
seen
intentional.
this pattern. Yeah, we've seen this pattern many times. The Crusades themselves were very much indicative of the same problem. Quite frankly, when you are living your life in response to someone else and attempting to change or vilify or somehow adversely interact with that group, you've already become a fucking hypocrite.
One of the differences here, though, is we're not Nero burning Christians at the stake and allowing, lions and other wild animals to tear them apart in the Colosseum. That's not where we are. We're just saying, you have this belief. We don't want you to impose it upon us. You go live your life the way you see fit, as long as you aren't hurting other people and you're treating other people the way you know that they want to be treated. And all will be well. But there's this idea that if they can't practice their faith in front of everybody and make other people practice their faith, their rights are being infringed upon, and even so much as modern day, considering themselves modern day martyrs. And that's kind of gross, because that sort of trivializes actual martyrs.
Yeah, I think there's a slight difference, and I'm not real sure how to describe it, so let me see if this makes sense. The primary problem that I see is that Christians want to impose, or let me pause there. Evangelical Christians, let me use that category for very specifically this subset of individuals, want to impose their values on what laws are established or not established. And this is kind of the problematic piece. Once religious thought forms the basis for legal precedent, you've crossed a line. And the anti-abortion, pro-life, those movements in general are very much representative of this particular argument. I don't care whether you are pro-abortion, pro-life, or anti-abortion, anti-life, take your pick, whatever combination of monikers you want to use. Doesn't matter. I do not have the right to tell you what to do with your pregnancy. And if my thought process is using my values to attempt to impose what you can and can't do, that's wrong. There should either be a very concise, scientific, medically decided line, or something that is not rooted in my perceived value of life, right? Based on my religious thoughts or feelings or anything else. So finding the distinction between what is imposing my thoughts and values from a philosophical or religious perspective as opposed to what has some basis in science, for lack of something else to pull from, can be tricky. I can understand where a lot of people don't understand those distinctions. They don't have the mental fortitude or capacity to analyze them in a way that some people do, right? It's just, some people are stupid. Let's just be blunt about it.
I think it's learned stupidity, but that's a whole other thing.
Yeah, that's fine. The whole point is that I get there is a subset of people who are driven by this thing, and they don't know how to identify what drives them to believe this way. The problem that comes into play is when our legal structure or any laws and regulations are driven from that perspective. Because at that point, you're imposing Christian beliefs and values, or potentially non-Christian. It's just historically it's been Christian beliefs and values. But you're imposing beliefs and values from one group onto everyone ubiquitously. And that's a problem. If there is no scientific basis to support a claim, there is no claim that should be honored. Everything else is subjective and defined by the rule of majority. Unfortunately, in many cases, the rule of majority, evangelical Christians in the United States.
We have a number of different ways set up for you to get in touch with us to provide feedback, ask questions, or just comment in about something we've discussed.
You can hit us up on Twitter or Instagram at untitled_hosts, or shoot an email over to untitled.hosts@gmail.com.
Or get in touch directly with Jesse at jthart.com, or get in touch with me, John, via telepathy.
If you would like to support our work or are interested in listening to our new after-show feed, head over to patreon.com/theUntitledPodcast and take a look at the options we have set up.
Thank you for listening.
We hope you've enjoyed the show.
And we hope to connect with more of you as we continue this journey.
That's a wrap.